reinforces their narrative of this nation's history, we have trouble. We're talking about hegemony. The biggest part of hegemony is the narrative and the control of the narrative. And so if Senator Obama, for political reasons, has to distance himself from the much more accurate narrative given by a gentleman who's in the room as I speak, whose version of this country's history, frankly, was considerably more accurate than the one that he cannot but endorse and hope to become president, then we're in trouble. And so, when Jeremiah Wright tells us the things we don't want to hear, and let's be clear, the problem with what Reverend Wright said in the eyes of most white folks, it wasn't his tone, and it wasn't the language he used. White folks do not mind a harsh tone. They don't mind spicy language. If you look at the rallies that have been held in Pennsylvania where they're yelling at the Obama supporters, they use language 10 times worse than anything this man said. It is the content they didn't like, not the tone. It is the subject matter. You can use harsh language as long as you're talking about what we want to talk about. But when Senator Obama had to get up in that speech in Philly, in that first paragraph, and as political speeches go, it was brilliant. As a speech on race, it was troubling. But I understand why it had to be given the way it was. Again, this isn't about him. It's about the culture in which we find ourselves. And so, when he stands up in that first paragraph, said what? That our founders, the founders of this nation, came here looking for freedom and liberty. Now that's the dominant narrative as to why they came. We know it's not why they came. As James Baldwin put it, they came here because they were starving and failing, and some of them were convicts and they couldn't make it in Europe. They didn't come seeking freedom, they came seeking land. We know they weren't about freedom because the way they acted once they got here, not just toward indigenous people, but toward one another. If you were of European descent and not praying the way they wanted you to, they would kill you. People who care about freedom don't drown and burn women for being supposed witches. So we didn't come seeking freedom, even for our group. We came seeking power and land, but that's not the dominant narrative, and so that can't be spoken, but it's true. And so we need to understand that unless we're prepared to challenge that dominant narrative, challenge it so that we understand that the creation, as I mentioned to you earlier, in that brief little thing I did earlier today, that the whole creation of this concept of whiteness was intended as a trick to take working class people of European descent and turn them against black folk, turn them against brown folk, turn them against one another, and ignore what those who hold the vast majority of that wealth are actually up to, not in the interest of any of those working people. If we're not willing to challenge that dominant narrative that reinforces the false mentality of white supremacy, then we're never going to break that down in a way that can create social justice for all of us, irrespective of race.